Hi, and good afternoon, and welcome to the Beat the GMAT webinar presented by Stratus Prep. And today we're talking about building a winning MBA application for a top 10 business school. Thank you for joining us. At the end of the presentation, we'll be doing Q&A, so if you have questions, feel free to submit those either throughout the presentation or at the end. If you have anything that's very specific to you, we do ask you to reach out to us directly. So let's get started. My name is Susan Cera, and I'm with Stratus Prep. And today we're going to talk about what are candidates actually being evaluated on when they're applying to business school. People think different things about this, and we're going to talk about exactly what admissions committees are specifically looking at. We'll also talk about what your application should be looking like in order to get accepted at a top 10 program. A little bit about me. My name is Susan Cera. I got my MBA from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. And for about 10 years, I was on the admissions committee at Duke, reading applications from candidates all over the world. So I read many essays, looked at lots of GMAT scores, lots of transcripts, and you got to know a lot of applicants through that process. And now I am the head of MBA admissions counseling at Stratus Prep. A little bit about Stratus Prep. We've been around for about 10 years. Stratus Prep is a full-service admissions counseling firm. Every year, we work with hundreds of aspiring MBA candidates. And in many instances, in addition to getting into top programs, we have clients who have received substantial and in some instances full scholarships to their top choice schools based on the strength of the applications they've put together. Those clients in turn go on to rate us very highly on the Beat the GMAT website, as well as other websites that cover admissions counseling services. Stratus Prep has a unique three-pronged approach to MBA admissions counseling. We work with our clients with a team. You have an individual personal coach who is your MBA counselor throughout the process. Along the way, you also have other people at Stratus Prep, including a senior strategist, and there is also an account manager who's with you through the entire process in the event that you need some additional help or need to add some different services to what you've purchased from us. In the 10 years that Stratus Prep has been around, we've been a featured expert in numerous publications, such as Forbes and U.S. News and World Report. And one thing that Stratus Prep really does is we work with our clients to help them develop their own unique story, put that into a compelling narrative that really resonates with the admissions committees of the schools that they have chosen to apply to with us. So let's talk about why do you get an MBA? What's the importance of an MBA? What can it do for you? An MBA is really a transformational 2 years for someone like yourself. During this time, you're going to have the opportunity to develop comprehensive knowledge that's going to be necessary for your success in business. What exactly does this mean? This means that you'll get cross-functional exposure. Perhaps you're a CPA now. You'll have an opportunity to learn about all the other functions and how they come together, learning about operations, human resources, and other things such as marketing or finance. Through the MBA program, you'll also have lots of opportunities to develop your soft skills, such as collaboration, teamwork, leadership, and negotiation skills. This happens not only in the classroom and working with your peers in your cohort, it also happens in activities outside the classroom, such as clubs, conferences, company treks that may happen during your time in business school. And throughout these 2 years, you're going to develop incredible relationships with your peers who are all really driven, dynamic, and diverse individuals who bring entirely different perspectives to the program. You're going to learn from these people, you're going to grow, you're going to become a better leader, a better teammate, And also through your time in an MBA program, you're going to be exposed to industry leaders through conferences, through company visits. One thing that a lot of people think about for an MBA is that it will provide a significant increase in your salary. Yes, this is true, but you also are going to leave an MBA program with skills that are going to help you in your life regardless of what you do moving forward. And that MBA that you get does not have to be from Harvard or Stanford or Wharton to provide value in your life. So what we're going to talk about today is how to get into a top school. However, one thing that you should take away from this is that there is a school for everyone, and you must find the school that has the right program that's a fit for you and your personal goals so that you can have that wonderful transformational 2 years in an MBA program and move forward in your short and long-term goals in your career. Let's talk about how your application is evaluated. Now, each of the top 10 schools will really have their own process for doing this, their own rankings and rating systems, but generally they will all evaluate candidates on the following 5 categories. They're going to look at your academics, and that encompasses where you went to college, what your GPA is, what your area of study was as an undergrad. They'll look at your GMAT score, and specifically at the quantitative portion of it. They're going to look at your work experience, and hopefully not see any gaps there. They're going to evaluate your leadership skills and your community involvement. One thing that admissions committee most looks forward to is reading essays. This is really an opportunity to learn about the individual who is applying, as are the recommendations, which are an equally important portion of your application prep to business school. Now, as I said, every school does this a little bit differently. At Harvard, for example, in different categories, each applicant is evaluated and rated 1 through 4 on the different categories. 1 being kind of an A, and 4 being a D. There are going to be very few people who are going to get straight A's in being evaluated. If you have multiple 4s, it's probably not going to look good for you. One thing that's important about how you're evaluated is that you're going to be compared against candidates who are in your own subgroup or demographic. At a school like Harvard, for example, they get close to 10,000 applications a year for 900 seats in a class, roughly. In order for them to compare candidates to one another, they can't compare each one against another 10,000. So they break up the world into different demographics or subgroups. And what you need to do is stand out within your own demographic. So with that, let's get started on talking about the specifics of these different areas. Academics. One thing to think about in academics is academics are really the one kind of quantitative piece of your application. And as such, academics drive a lot with respect to the rankings. And the top 10 programs are exactly that, the top 10, because of their ranking. And that's driven a lot by things like average GPA or average GMAT of the incoming class. So what does that mean to you? When an admissions committee looks at your undergrad transcripts, this is something you can no longer change. You went to where you went to school, it's done, your GPA is what it is, and it's on your transcript. They'll evaluate your GPA. You want your GPA to be within the 80% range of that particular school. But they will take into account the rigor of the academic program of which we're a part. So having a 4.0 from a non-competitive school does not necessarily look any better than having a 3.5 from a top engineering school in the world. With respect to GMAT, this is something that is incredibly driving, and for some reason, the GMAT averages for the top 10 schools just keep going up and up and up every year. Let's look at as an example. Wharton right now has about a mean or an average of 730 on their GMAT. If you want to get into Wharton, you need to have something pretty close to that. The 80% range, meaning 80% of the 860 some students who end up in a class at Wharton have a GMAT that is between 700 and 770. So if your GMAT score is below a 700, you need to be showing something beyond that GMAT. We're looking at 10% of the class at Wharton having a GMAT under 700. But they did have someone in their class last year who had a 620. So all is not lost if you do not have a 720 or higher on your GMAT. If you think back to a second to GPAs, this may or may not be more important, but HBS on average has a GMAT of roughly, a GPA of roughly 3.6 or 3.7. So if your GPA happens to be a 2.5, that doesn't mean that you cannot get into Harvard, but just keep in mind that if they admit someone with a 2.5, in order to maintain that 3.6 or 3.7 overall GPA average, they'd have to admit 4 people with a 4.0 to make up for admitting one person with a 2.5. So all is not lost if you're outside that range. You just will need somewhere else in the application. Just a quick note on TOEFL. If you happen to be a non-native English speaker or your undergrad education was in a language other than English, you will likely need to take the TOEFL. I do recommend that you check with each school individually to see what their requirements are. Some schools do have a minimum standard for the TOEFL. So if you are below that minimum standard, you will not even be considered. So make sure you understand what those numbers are and prepare adequately to take the TOEFL in order to be considered at these top programs. Let's continue on and talk about work experience. The beauty of an MBA program is that you are with a cohort of other students who all have vastly different and very unique work experiences going into the program. What you need to do in your application is make the most of the work experience that you have. On average, students starting at top MBA programs will have 4 to 5 years of work experience. That's the average. The reality is there will be some students at top MBA programs who have 0 years of work experience and have come straight out of undergrad or maybe straight out of medical school and have never worked a formal job in their life. You will, on the other end of the range, perhaps have someone who has 12, 15, 16 years of work experience, and they bring entirely different perspectives. So there's no pure quantitative way to look at work experience. But let me talk to you a little bit about what it is that admissions committee will be looking for. If you have any gaps in your work experience that are more than 2, perhaps 3 months, you will need to explain those. In the absence of an explanation, an admissions committee member can make up whatever the heck they think you might have been doing at that time. So make sure to address those gaps. If you happen to have had a period of unemployment, explain what you did during that time. Maybe you traveled. That's a great opportunity to build skills that are valuable in an MBA class. They will look for experiences that you might have in managing people, processes, budgets, projects. Make sure that your resume quantifies the results of your work as much as possible. If you happen to work in a company that has a standard progression of jobs from analyst to associate and so forth, they will look to see if perhaps you were promoted ahead of your peers. That will demonstrate that you are, in many ways, or in some ways at least, better than the others who are hired along with you. If you happen to have moved companies or switched positions multiple times during your work experience, you need to make sure that you connect the dots and show that the changes that you made to your work path, your career path, make sense, and each builds upon the previous experience to prepare you to go to business school. You want to make sure also that you share any experiences you have that might be global in nature from a work perspective, and also perhaps any cross-functional experience that you have, as your ability to understand the perspectives of others is very viewed at a top MBA program. Most applications will either in a short answer or in an essay ask you to share your short and long-term goals. As an admissions committee member is evaluating your previous work experience, you want to make sure that they can connect the dots between what you have done and accomplished so far in life and how that, through an MBA, puts you on a trajectory to meet your short and long-term goals. We talked about rankings with respect to academics. Work experience kind of plays into that as well, but more on the finishing end of an MBA. Rankings are driven by job placement and salary. So before admitting you to a program, admissions committee wants to know that you are employable on the back end of the program and that the goals that you have stated are something that you could reasonably accomplish coming out of their MBA program. So keep that in mind. If you have goals that don't align with your previous work experience, if you're trying to make a major career change, then you may look like a less desirable candidate. Next, let's talk about leadership and community involvement and why this is important to admissions committee. Basically, your past commitment to activities or leadership opportunities demonstrates your propensity to get involved when you're in an MBA program. Because much of the learning, as we discussed earlier, much of the learning and the growth in a transformational MBA experience occurs outside of the classroom. Let's get some examples here. You do a lot of learning in the classroom, and there are opportunities to apply it outside the classroom, such as if you want to go into consulting, you might choose to join the consulting club and participate in case competitions. And through this, you're working on your teamwork skills, you're using the financial and analytical skills perhaps that you learned in the classroom and applying those in a low-risk environment where you can test out your negotiation skills, you can work on your leadership, your presentation skills, and previously having been involved in the community will indicate to admissions committee that you are likely to get involved in activities such as this that are going to help you make the most of an MBA program. Another way that you might get involved while you're in an MBA program would be in perhaps organizing a conference or a seminar series for a club that's in your area of interest. In this sort of opportunity, you would have the ability to reach out to industry leaders, perhaps to invite them to be presenters or on a panel at a conference. And engaging with those professionals, you're testing out your communication skills, your negotiation skills. You're also developing relationships within the industry that you want to work. This is why it's important to show that you have leadership and community involvement in advance of being admitted to business school. It also demonstrates that you can manage a balanced and engaged life, that you're multidimensional, not simply flat and someone who is just going to study, take tests, and do well in school. So let's talk about how admissions committee looks at your leadership and involvement. What they're really looking for is leadership, not just participation. So they'd rather see you very involved in one activity over a long period of time than just simply participating in 6 or 8 different one-day events. So don't just attend a charity, go out and organize it and execute it. You should also pursue activities that are related to your passion. This will make it that much easier to speak about your activities in the context of your overall story, if you're involved with things that are important to you and meaningful to you. And as I mentioned earlier, being involved with your community in a leadership role demonstrates that you will, when you attend an MBA program, get involved in the school community as a student and perhaps more importantly as an alumni, because very much part of the top MBA programs is your continued involvement with that program as an alumni, of being a resource that current students can reach out to learn more about your industry, going back and participating in panels and conferences and speaker series, and continuing to grow the brand of that top program. So don't just be a joiner, take initiative and show commitment. Now, some of you guys may be saying, well, I've got a job where I'm a consultant and I work 60, 80 hours a week. I can't make a commitment to organizing and executing a charity event. I just can't do it. So what can you do? You can make an impact within your organization. Perhaps you can get yourself involved with recruiting the next round of associates from your undergrad institution. Perhaps you can mentor the summer interns who are working with you for the summer. Think about the skills you need to develop as a leader. And sometimes those come about in ways that are not necessarily a formal title. Next, let's talk about your essays and crafting a compelling narrative. Essays are really your opportunity to control your own destiny. Unlike your work experience, some of it is already done. You cannot change it. You can't change your undergrad transcript. You only have so much control over your GMAT. But there is nothing stopping any one of you from getting basically an A on your essays. And that can make a huge difference. It's really an opportunity to differentiate yourself from within your subgroup or demographic. Show your unique background and perspective. A couple things that you need to do in order to craft a compelling narrative. You need to start early. You need to understand yourself and what's important to you. And you need to investigate program offerings from different MBA programs to understand how the particulars of a program, be it their curriculum, their clubs, what their culture is, how they're going to move you towards your short and long-term goals. And you want to make sure that you fit with a particular school. And your essays come across in a way that says, if you admit me, this is the only school that I want to go to. Let's think about fit for a second. If you think about top programs, let's take ourselves to Chicago. At Booth, they're looking for analytical thinkers who are intellectually curious, passionate about innovation, and ready to challenge the status quo. Go across town to Kellogg, and they're looking for something a bit different. Their 4 pillars are intellectual depth, looking for people who have critical thinking skills and have the ability to solve complex problems. They want students who have a global perspective, can understand problems from different viewpoints, and are appreciative of the fact that there are people who bring different perspectives to the table. They want students who show leadership and social responsibility. They can inspire trust within a team and develop teams. And they also value experiential learning. As you craft essays for these 2 different schools, they are going to be entirely different. If you think you can write a single essay and submit it to 6 different programs of the top 10, in the best case, that essay might be the right essay for 1 of those 6 schools. In the worst case, it's not the right essay for any of those 6 schools. So you really need to think about fit and communicating what you bring to a program and how it resonates with what's important to that program. And what is very important in writing essays is be authentic. Be yourself, not who you think admissions committee wants you to be. They really want you to be yourself. Ask for assistance on this. Bounce ideas off your family, off your friends, off your colleagues. get help, because it's really hard to do by yourself. And actually, one of the reasons that I came to Stratus Prep was that after reading essays for years at Duke, I got to the point where I would read essays and know in my heart that an applicant was way stronger than what they presented themselves at. I saw glimmers of little pieces of a person that I really wanted to back and get into the program, but they didn't do a really good job of crafting a compelling narrative. And in my role at Stratus Prep, I have the opportunity to work with individuals and get them to present their best selves through the application process, specifically in the essays. So you need to start early. Take your time. Get to know yourself and show that you're a fit at a particular school and that you'll contribute to the school in that transformational experience. Let's talk about recommendation. A lot of aspiring MBAs think, oh man, I need to get a recommendation from the CEO or the managing director. Virtually every MBA program is going to request that you submit a recommendation from your current manager. They absolutely understand that there will be situations in which an applicant is not capable of getting a recommendation from their current manager. Perhaps the manager left the company. Perhaps they recently changed jobs. Perhaps they're in a situation where you're up for a promotion, and if you were to let your manager know that you're considering leaving, that promotion might not happen, and then where would you be? All you need to do is explain the situation. That's what an optional essay is for in an application. Explain why it is that you can't get a recommendation from your current manager, and explain why the person you chose to do your recommendation is the best fit for providing a recommendation on your behalf. What you want to do in identifying a second recommender is really identify your champions. Who's going to go to bat for you? Who's going to attest to you being the best in your peer group? You need to have someone who knows you really well write your recommendation. So you don't want to go up to your manager a week before the deadline and say, hey, can you write my MBA recommendation? Build that relationship. Reach out to a mentor who's known you for a while. Make sure that in working with your recommenders to get them to develop your recommendations, you share with them your goals and help them to understand why a particular program is the right fit for you. For example, if you're applying to Stanford, Stanford is looking for insightful, principled leaders who can drive global change. You might be able to provide your recommender with specific examples of what you've done that was incredibly insightful. Were you in a situation where you had an ethical dilemma and took the high road, demonstrating that you're a principled leader, or you will be a principled leader, you're a principled teammate right now? Have you done something to drive global change? You want to make sure that your recommenders are writing specific examples about you. You might have an opportunity, if you're actively involved in an outside activity, to have a recommendation written by someone who you don't necessarily work with in a formal capacity, but perhaps you're on a volunteer position on a board of a nonprofit. This can provide an opportunity to give admissions committee a glimpse of you from a totally different perspective than from work, and that can be of great value. Your recommendations need to be glowing, and each one of them should jump off the page and make the reader say, I want this person in my class. We must have this student come to our school next year. And having lots of superlatives in a recommendation is not sufficient. Those recommendations need to highlight very specific examples of accomplishments that you've made in your role and the value that you bring to the organization. So what do you need to do? Make sure you're developing relations early on and you choose the right recommenders so that they can be well positioned to write a glowing recommendation for you. One thing to keep in mind is that admissions officers are not computers, they are human beings. Just like you, they get up in the morning, they brush their teeth, they go on and they read applications all day long. Some of those are incredibly boring, others stand out. You want to be one that when the admissions officer finishes reading your essays and looks through your application, they want you at their school. You want them to just touch them as a person. I remember writing up notes on essays saying, I laughed, I cried, this is brilliant. We must have this person in our class. More importantly, make sure you're presenting your best self and who you are. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but does the application come across sounding like you? Or is it you trying to be someone else that you think admissions committee wants? Admissions is, it's really a lot like dating. You need to be confident and show a sincere interest in a particular program. Then you'll be a lot more appealing to admissions committee. In my time at Duke, I saw lots of phenomenal candidates who didn't show any passion for the Duke program. They might have had a 750 GMAT and a 3.8 GPA from a top undergrad. They might not have even gotten admitted, offered an interview because they didn't show why they needed to be at that school. Let's reflect back for a minute and think about all the different pieces that we talked about, because your academics, your work experience, your leadership and community involvement, your essays, and your recommendations paint for admissions committee a holistic view of you. You can have a weakness in one of these areas, but it can be made up for in other areas. They look at it all together. And you want to make sure that they think of you as a person and they can picture you perhaps engaging with other students in the hallways of their school. They can see you getting engaged in classroom discussions with professors because that passion has come across in your applications. So how can Stratus Prep help you? You know what, seriously, we don't know yet. We can't know what you'll need in terms of profile development or help on your essays for an MBA application until we speak to you. We need to know more about you. With that said, we do have products that start at $250 and range up to a few $1,000s for us to help you with comprehensive help on applications for 3, 4, 5, 6 different business schools. So what do I encourage you to do? Let's go on a date. Contact us. We'll set you up for 30 minutes with one of our candidate strategists. It's really a getting to know you, a little bit of a speed dating. During that time, we'll listen to what are your goals? What are your dreams? Where do you see yourself going? Why do you need an MBA? And what do you think you need in order to create a winning application? And after those 30 minutes, that might be it with us. Worst thing that can happen is that someone from the Stratus Prep team has given you sincere insight into your profile and how you can better prepare yourself to present your best self and your strongest applications for top MBA programs. That's not so bad. 30 minutes of your time, and you'll get that great feedback. You might not want to go on a second date, but if you do, we'll give you a 15% discount if you decide to move forward with us on a profile development package or a comprehensive MBA admissions package for 3 or more schools. You really need to get started now because before you know it, the summer is going to have gone by and the application deadlines are in September. A lot of the essay prompts are already out, so you need to get started soon. I am going to wrap it up now in my formal presentation. I want to thank you for attending. I appreciate your time, and I want to thank Beat the GMAT for hosting us. And now I'm going to open the floor to questions so that I can answer individual questions. Let me just go through these here. Appreciate everyone in attendance, and not take my time here and answer questions here. Here's a question. It's about community involvement and leadership. Is it better to be a joiner than to do no community involvement at all? That's a great question. Admissions committee will see right through you signing up this summer to do some volunteer work. You know, one Saturday with Habitat for Humanity, then doing a charity walk the following week. If you haven't done anything before, it's kind of a little bit too late to get involved. You need to make sure that your involvement is part of who you are. And what you may need to do is look beyond the community at what you're doing elsewhere in your life where you perhaps have demonstrated leadership in your workplace or perhaps in a family situation. Demonstrating leadership is what they are trying to evaluate. So thank you for that question. The question is mentoring at work viewed the same by admissions committee as volunteering for a charity? These two are kind of different things, and what's important in presenting them is what have you learned from these experiences? How are you a better candidate from having mentored at work or for having volunteered with a charity? Volunteering with a charity can be a one-off thing, but if you volunteer with a charity that's part of your passion and perhaps part of your vision, that's going to be more compelling on your application. I'm just going through these questions here. How do you demonstrate gaps on your resume if you only list the most 3 recent opportunities? It's a great question. You should make sure that all of your time is accounted for from when you graduated from college. So if perhaps you have 5 different jobs since you graduated from college, you need to show all of those on your resume. Some of them may be just 2 or 3 lines, with the bulk of them being something bigger, but you do need to show those on your resume. Otherwise, it's going to look like a gap, and an admissions committee is going to kind of wonder what you were doing at that time. For example, I just saw a resume where someone had graduated in the spring of 2013, but the first job listed on their resume wasn't until March of the following year. I had no idea what that individual had done for 9 or 10 months. I might guess that they couldn't find a job, or perhaps they were traveling around the world. I didn't know. You need to make sure that all of those months are accounted for over that period of time. I've got a question here that asks, what is your approach working with older applicants who are 30 plus? That is a great question. As we discussed earlier with respect to work experience, your average student at a top MBA program typically has 4 or 5 years of work experience. I'd imagine if you are over 30, you probably have something closer to 7 to 10 years of work experience. And the most important thing you can do when you have more work experience and you're a more mature candidate applying is explain why it is you need an MBA and why it's now. Perhaps there is a really good reason why you didn't apply for business school when you were 26 or 27 years old. Perhaps you had intended to apply, but then had a new opportunity presented to you work-wise, and it just wasn't the right time. But now you have gotten to a place where in order to move forward in your career and reach your next goals, you need to develop new skills, new knowledge, and then build forward from there. So we definitely have worked with a lot of applicants who are 30 plus, and please do reach out to us so we can discuss your specifics. From your experience, what has been the most convincing / surprising story? That's a great question. And I actually was reflecting back to this just recently. And I want to say that this story that I read, this essay, I probably read 6 or 7, maybe even 8 years ago, and it stuck with me to this day. And it was a story, the essay prompt was something along the lines of, please discuss a person, place, or event that has influenced you and why. And the response to this question was talking about how this particular candidate, who happened to be from Korea, had learned so much about life by cooking with his mother in the kitchen. And culturally, that was something that was perhaps very unique. And rather than just speaking about his mother and how his mother had influenced him, it was the time they spent working together in creating food, and just that time in an informal environment that had taught him so many things and made him a real person. Because I could picture this person cooking with his mother. So that was really something that you wouldn't necessarily expect in a business school application, but it was genuine and it was real, and it was something that was very important to him, and it came across beautifully in his essays. We've got a question here of, what is the one thing that you do not want to see in an MBA application? I think one of the biggest things that I do not want to see in an application is someone who wants to do a major career change and there's nothing that connects the dots. So during my time at Duke, I read hundreds of applications from people who were IT or software engineers who just wanted to go into management consulting, and there wasn't a good reason why. They didn't explain what it was that they wanted to do, and it came across as, I just want to come to the United States, get an MBA, and make more money. And being a strategy consultant is the best way to do that. It's absolutely not what an admissions committee wants to hear. I presume that a lot of these candidates had wonderful things they could have done moving forward into a business role in the software space or technology space, and that would have made a lot more sense as they presented their story. It's a good question about recommenders. What is the best, is it best to get a recommender that is an alumni of the school that you are applying to? That is a great question. So assuming that you have to have one recommendation from your manager, that manager will write your recommendations for, perhaps you're applying to 4, 5, 6 schools. When you have to pick your second recommender, you might pick the same two, a second recommender who will write recommendations for 3 or 4 of those schools. But if there's one particular school where you know someone and have worked closely with someone who is an alumni of that school, you might pick them to write a second recommendation just for that school. They understand what the culture is, and they can speak to how you will fit, and you are the right fit for that particular school. So that's a great question. You don't necessarily have to have that. You can sometimes even add a kind of a bonus recommendation that is unsolicited and is more of a letter of recommendation rather than the formal recommendation form that could be sent in separately from someone who knows you well, who went to that school and can speak to your got a question here. If I were to switch jobs 3 to 6 months before submitting my business school applications, how would this be viewed? So if you were to switch jobs, I think right about now would be the question. That if you were switching jobs this week and you're applying in round 1, you would have only been in your new job for 3 months. It really depends what that job switch is. And one thing that Stratus Prep can help with is connecting the dots between, why did you leave your last job? How is this new job that you will have for roughly a year before starting business school, how is that going to make you a better student in that class and add more value to your classmates than if you had just stayed in the role that you were in? You definitely don't want to be staying in a job where you're not being challenged just so that you can wait and apply to business school. So if there is an opportunity that builds on your previous experience and allows you to develop new skills and responsibilities moving towards business school, I say go for it. I've got a question here. Some programs need a resume in just 1 page. I'm an experienced IT professional with 9 years of experience, and I find it almost impossible to fit my experience and success stories in just 1 page. What should be my focus in this case? You absolutely need to have your resume on 1 page, and what you need to do is focus on what are the things that you really want to highlight in your experience as an IT professional. What can you quantify? What are the accomplishments that you are most proud of? And you really need to think long and hard about that, and we can definitely help you with that. But you need to focus on, I would say, leadership, I would say teamwork, and I would say innovation. Those are 3 of the biggest things that the top schools are looking for. So if you can share examples of those on your resume, that's great. And you may also, as an IT professional, be able to share that you have experience across different industries, perhaps, or you've had an opportunity to engage with clients or in cross-functional teams. Those are things you might highlight as well. I'm just going through all of these questions here. How do I differentiate between short-term and long-term goals? That's definitely something that you need to be able to articulate in business school. So one thing that Stratus Prep does is we ask you to look way out in your future. What's your dream job? And what are your career aspirations? There really are different skills that you will have that you need for a short-term, immediate post-MBA goal. Longer term, you need to have a goal that builds on the skills that you're going to develop in that short-term goal job. So for example, you might want to go into the healthcare space, and perhaps the role that you want right out of business school is to work for a healthcare consulting firm so that you can learn best practices across different types of companies and in different functions. And your midterm goal might be to go into a specific management role within a healthcare company or a pharmaceutical company or a hospital administrator role. And then the long-term goal might be something like managing an entire marketing unit for a pharmaceutical company. So your long-term goal needs to build off your short-term goal and what you will learn in that role. One thing I encourage my clients to do is to go and look at job descriptions for your dream job. Figure out what skills you need for that, and that's what you're going to need from an MBA to get there. Got a question here. Many top schools ask for what candidates can do for the school. Could you please advise what admissions committee is looking for in such a question? It's a great question, and we talked about that a lot. This goes to fit. And what can you do for that school? A lot of schools are very much student-driven cultures and very collaborative. There are lots of student clubs that you might get involved in. Some of those are professional clubs, perhaps the finance club. Perhaps you want to help manage the portfolio that a group of second-year students always manage each year. Figure out what sorts of activities exist at a given school and how you can participate in those as an opportunity to transform yourself en route to making your short and long-term goals. I'm seeing quite a few specific questions about specifics for individual applicants. I encourage you to reach out to us and sign up for a consultation so that we can speak to you individually about your questions. Just see if I can't go through a couple more questions here. Here's a question from someone who is a freelancer, and how do they show leadership skills, and from whom should they get a recommendation? So if you are a freelancer, you might work with one of your clients. Might be someone who would write a recommendation for you and share the value you added to them through working with that individual. In terms of leadership skills, if you're a freelancer and you're just working by yourself, some of the leadership you're showing is perhaps in mentoring your clients. You may need to look beyond your job for leadership skills. So hopefully that answered your question. We've just got a couple more minutes here. Let me see if there are any questions that I missed. If you asked a question early on and I did not answer it, feel free to pop it up now. So I may have lost some along the way. Oh, here's a great question. Does it matter when you apply? Do they evaluate applications after a certain deadline or as they come in? Typically at the top MBA programs, there are admissions deadlines, and anything that might come in before might be read, but they really wait until that deadline to move forward and make any decisions. So most schools will have a deadline in September, which they call round one, and there'll be another deadline in early January, which will be round two. If you are from a demographic that is typically overrepresented, I would absolutely recommend that you apply in the earliest round possible if your application is ready. There are lots of great candidates, and in evaluating round two applications, admissions committee will already know how many seats have been filled up from round one. So there may be fewer seats to be had in round two, and it gets more competitive as you move forward. I absolutely do not encourage you to apply in round three unless for some reason you were somewhere where it was absolutely impossible for you to write your application. I think we are just about out of time. Let me see if there's one more question I might answer. Someone is asking, will the school get in touch with the recommender directly? Generally, the answer here is no. If there is a red flag raised in a recommendation, they may reach out to your recommender and ask something specific, but generally what happens is when you submit an application for a particular school, you provide the email address of each of your recommenders, and the school will send a link to access a page online to submit your application. They then have the email address and contact information of your recommender, but I think it's rarely the case that they actually will reach out to someone to ask any questions unless there's something they need clarification on. So I think that's about all the time we have. There are some questions I've seen here about very specific individual questions. Please do sign up for a free consult. We'd love to talk to you and learn more about your individual story. I can't really answer all the questions now, but appreciate you guys participating, and I wish you the best day. And I want to thank Beat the GMAT for hosting this webinar, and I wish you all the best